Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Appreciate you coming out tonight in this rain. I had to drive all the way from Harford County. So today we're going to be talking about Eliza Parker. Now, I know many of you know, you're from Lancaster, most of you. I was talking to a gentleman from Cecil County, so you know this story. But I'm coming with a new perspective, a different perspective. We hear about William, we hear about Gorsuch, but what about Eliza? What about Eliza? So I looked into Eliza. The National Park Service said, you know, we need more sites on the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. And that's when I started digging a little bit more into Eliza and her family. And so, but we're going to start out with this video because this will give you an idea of the property that she was raised on, born and raised on, and escaped from was a big deal to Harford County. Harford County bought the property not that long ago, and it took many entities to come together to bring all these millions of dollars, and it made major news. But guess what? They didn't know anything about this story. They didn't know anything about it, so they were like, oh, wait a minute. But they did embrace it in the end. So let me see if I can get this to start for us.
Multi-million-dollar land purchase right along the Chesapeake Bay.
Amy Kawada spoke with officials today and explains what they hope to offer the community.
It's a project that's been nearly 20 years in the making.
It is clearly one of the most significant land purchases that Harford County has had in decades.
Thanks to a partnership with the state of Maryland, Aberdeen Proving Ground, and the Harford Land Trust, the nearly $6 million purchase of Belle Vue Farm in Havertide Grace that sits right in between Tidings Park and Swan Harbor Farm along the Chesapeake Bay shoreline is now complete. And this 347-acre waterfront property that dates back to pre-revolutionary times will be preserved and turned into a Harford County park, including 1 mile of Chesapeake Bay coastline.
I think the environmental significance of these type of properties, of course, are under tremendous development pressure.
Officials say the historic Belle Vue Farm was the missing puzzle piece to preserving 1,250 acres on the Oakington Peninsula.
It is truly a crown jewel.
With the property owners dating all the way back to 1661, county leaders hope this land serves as a learning tool for the state of Maryland and beyond.
There'll be no development other than recreational activities, and so 100 years from now, this farm along the Chesapeake Bay will stand as it is today.
Leaders say they're looking forward to the finished product so that everyone can enjoy all the Oakington Peninsula has to offer.
It will be one of the areas that has a tremendous population of different Maryland varieties of birds to come and study.
And officials say they plan to get started right away as far as planning for any potential trails and studying the land to get a better understanding of what would be the best fit for this property. Reporting from Havertide Grace, I'm Amy Kawada for WJZ.
Harford County leaders.
There I am. So I'm going to hold it right here. So the director of Parks and Rec owns it, came to a commission meeting. As you heard from Mabel, I serve on the Harford County Historic Preservation Commission, and all excited, you know, we finished the sale. And several of us knew the history and like, are you going to tell the full history? And we started telling a little bit, then he's like, oh, because they didn't know about that. So they, to their credit, they have had several meetings where they've invited the community to give their input on what it should be. It may not be all about birds. And we, as the county executive started out telling us, it's going to be a little bit more. We're going to talk about the Native Americans who were there before 1661 and the individuals who were enslaved there. And Harford County is really proud of when families have the property and keep it in the family for 100 years or more. They had a whole big thing a few years ago about families that had their property for over 100 years. So this being one of the longest, so as you can see, they were very proud. But they were not familiar with what happened on 9/11. When we say 9/11, we think about what happened in this century. And it was a day that shocked the nation, right? We all can remember where we were when that happened. Okay, got to do this. But what about 9/11, 1851? 150 years before, another big incident occurred that shocked the nation in a different way, but it still had its impact. Oh, am I not hitting the right thing? Okay. And that's the day of the standoff between Maryland slaveholder and formerly enslaved individuals, most of them who came from Maryland, but they were living in Christiana, Pennsylvania. That day, that event is a complex series of events that culminated in the largest treason trial in U.S. history, maybe the shortest too. But some will say it's a day that ended in mayhem and death, and a spark that led to the Civil War. Get dramatic. Led to the Civil War, which was what, a whole decade later? But, and it was first called the Christiana Riot. William Still and others called it the Christiana Tragedy. And today we mostly say Christiana Resistance because we look at it from different perspectives. So that's what we'll be talking about with a focus on Eliza Belle Vue Farm and the Harford County connection. So just from a different perspective at this well-known story. So what happened in Christiana, Pennsylvania on 9/11? We're going to talk about that. What does it have to do with Belle Vue Farm? Who was Eliza? We're going to find out who she was and how did it impact the nation. Now, we know it happened here in Pennsylvania. Now, sometimes when I mention Christiana Resistance, people start thinking about the Christiana Mall in Delaware. And I said, no, Christiana, Pennsylvania. And then I didn't know there was a Christiana, Pennsylvania. So I have to orient them a little bit, but I know you all know. You know. But it's not just here in Christiana. There are many counties in Maryland that are part of this story. So Baltimore County, so since you guys know a little bit about it, you know that's that big, the standoff. But Baltimore County is where Edward Gorsuch and his sons come from. Anne Arundel County is where William Parker comes from, the leader in the House of the Vigilance Committee. And then we have Frederick Douglass. How did he get in this story? Well, he's in it. And he came from Talbot County. And then little known Harford County. They're in this story. And now, after this, you're going to know that it figures prominently in the story. That is where Eliza Parker, her sister, Hannah, and I think she had 2 or 3 brothers, and I never can find their names, and her mother, Cassie, or Cassandra. So this is Belle Vue Farm. Just one little house, not big. When I first went there, I'm like, oh, is this it? All this fuss is about this? Or is it about the birds? And so this is what it looks like. Now, this is the rear of the house. This is the rear. So when you drive up, has anybody been to Swan Harbor Farm? Okay, a couple people. They usually have weddings there. Oh, I think lost some sound. Maybe I'm moving too much. And it's next to it on the left, so it's contiguous to it. But this is a long, long driveway. You saw the aerial view. It's huge, 300 some odd acres. Now, this is still the rear image, but let's talk a little bit more about it. Remember, it's about 347 acres. It's about 3 miles south of the city of Havre de Grace. Anybody been to Havre de Grace? Okay, a lot of people. And it's bounded by the Chesapeake, and as I mentioned, contiguous with Swan Harbor Farm and Oakington Farm. So in Havre de Grace, where the Susquehanna meets the Chesapeake by the lighthouse and the Maritime Museum, and then you continue down with the Chesapeake. We know that the county purchased it in 2020, and then recently was able to get it added to the National Park Service, National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. Now that's similar to, they have National Register of Historic Places. They have a new reconstruction network. They have a civil rights network. So this is one of their networks, one of the most rigorous ones because, you know, everybody claims they have a tunnel. They have a hidden room where somebody was hidden during slavery, right? Escapes. So they really put you to the test. You really have to have. So, but we were successful, thank goodness. And so this is a little bit about the network. One of the things they like to do, they want to honor, preserve, and promote the history of resistance to enslavement through escape and flight, which continue to inspire people worldwide. And they also, through the network, helps to advance the idea that all human beings embrace the right to self-determination and freedom from oppression. So they look at not only, sometimes when you say Underground Railroad, people immediately go to a safe house, someone who hid somebody. But this network looks at what's sometimes referred to as reverse Underground Railroad, where somebody escaped from, or where somebody was kidnapped to, or so they look at the different ways that people are trying to attain freedom. And so the ones in Harford County, none of them were safe houses. This particular Hayes High House at Harford Community College, that's the original property on Harford Community College, if you haven't been there. And that was the first one, and it talks about the story of Sam Archer, who was enslaved on that property. And so they have a marker now, and that was the first property that we were able to get on there. So, and he escaped. He's in William Still's book. So if you haven't, we'll talk a little bit more about William Still if you hadn't heard of him before. And then the second one we got on was the birthplace of Margaret Morgan at Mill Green Mill. And this Eliza Parker's site, they like to put it in the context of the individual who escaped. Now, Hayes High House already had a designation, so they didn't want to say Sam Archer's escape house. But Belle Vue, they call it Eliza Parker's escape site. So William Still, he's known today as the father of the Underground Railroad. Is anybody, they probably have his book in the bookstore, or you could get it online. It's about 800 pages. It's a pretty big book. Now this book, though, it was a culmination of his notes and stories and incidents that happened. He would keep notebooks when people would come through. He's originally from New Jersey, and he got a job in Philadelphia working for the Anti-Slavery Society, the Vigilance Committee. And so he would help people get to Canada or further north. And but he started taking notes to keep these stories so that people could reconnect. So he would document the names of the individuals. Often they had aliases. And then he would document who the slaveholder was, maybe what they looked like, and or the individual freedom seeker looked like, and a little description about them, and then maybe whatever description they might give about the slaveholder. You know, how they were treated and why they decided this was the time that they needed to get their freedom. Now, just to reiterate, so he documented at least 20 freedom seekers from Harford County. Sorry, okay. And we're actually at Hosanna doing a research project now where we're going through his book and looking at the 1858 map, and which usually has landowners on it, and then the names of towns and hamlets and villages from 1858, and cross-referencing all of those, like extracting all of those and cross-referencing those in his book. Now, some of those are in the book, but some in the book, those individuals are not on the map. So we're going both directions to document that, and then we're going to plot it out and tell their stories. Do, deeper research into all those individuals that are documented. And maybe we'll get some more sites on the Network to Freedom because we'll have that rigorous research. Now, just to give you an idea how important Havre de Grace was to the Underground Railroad, we have William Whipper, who was a friend of William Still, a colleague who helped in the Underground Railroad. Now, he did help. He was an agent in a different way than William Still, and he lived in Columbia. And so William Still asked him, can you tell us, so William Still you have to hide your notes because being an abolitionist was very dangerous. Very dangerous. Some were killed. You were locked up even if you had abolitionist newspapers, incendiary newspapers, they called them. And so William Whipper kept this hidden and then destroyed most of them. William Still on the other side, he decided to keep his. So that was actually very courageous just to keep the documents. If you go to Philadelphia, you can see some of his notebooks at the, I think it's the I forget which library it is. But so this is what William Whipper says in William Still's book, or what he says, well, I've destroyed all my notes, but this I do remember. And he says, you are perfectly cognizant of the fact that after the decision in York, Pennsylvania, of the celebrated Prigg case, Pennsylvania was regarded as free territory, which Canada afterwards proved to be, and that the Susquehanna River was the recognized northern boundary of the slave-holding empire. The borough of Columbia, situated on its eastern bank in the county of Lancaster, was the great depot where the fugitives from Virginia and Maryland first landed. He said, but previous to that Prigg case just messed everything up. Slaveholders could come in and practically did whatever they wanted. But he said, previous to that period, the line of fugitive travel was from Baltimore by the way of Havre de Grace to Philadelphia. But the difficulty of a safe passage across the river at that place caused the route to be changed to York, Pennsylvania. And if you get William Still's book, you'll see he has this illustration the illustration you mostly see about this was in his book. And he gives his rendition of what happened from talking to different people. So his book is very important for our understanding of the Underground Railroad. It was contemporaneous. He's writing it at the time. And so he actually didn't publish his book until 1872. But it has many stories, you've probably heard of, I think it's Helen, and I can't think of her husband's name, Kraft, that disguised themselves, or Henry Box Brown, and all those stories are in there as well. So let's talk a little bit about the Davis family. The Davis family owned, as they say, as they claim, Eliza Parker. She wasn't Parker then. Her siblings and her mother. This is the front of the house, which faces the Chesapeake. I mean, from the front of the house to maybe where that row is, that's where the Chesapeake is. Not very far, and it just kind of drops, and there's rocks and things. So they're right on the water. That's an important point. Now, you heard how it's one of the largest and longest single-family property ownership in the Harford County history. After a series of land grants. Do you know what land grants are? You just get free land. Not just, an acre, half an acre that we pay thousands for just to own. No, they got hundreds of acres for free. Can you imagine that? And it took the 3 major entities just to buy that property. Well, Garrett Rutten got it for free. By 1809, it was owned by Elijah Davis. He was the patriarch of the family, and he was married to a descendant of Garrett Rutten. So as you can see, it's a 2-story brick house. At one point, there were 2 slave quarters. That's a little later when they do a historic property analysis. This is in the 20th century. They're looking at what was left. There was an outdoor kitchen, a carriage house, a stable, a meat house, a hen house, and a fish house on the shore. What did slavery look like at Belle Vue Farm? All right. In 1790, Elijah Davis had about 14 enslaved individuals. 1798, he has 16. So he's growing. By 1800, it more than doubles. But in 1829, he dies. What happens when a slaveholder dies and he has lots of property? Well, the property gets divided. There are family disputes. He doesn't really name any of the enslaved people, but he does mention that he wants certain Negroes, the better to enable them to take such Negroes to the said state of Alabama. So a lot of people from this area went further south because they could get more land, cotton's booming, and Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. You do a little digging, you'll see a lot of families, I wouldn't say Pennsylvania families, but Maryland families, and certainly I can name a few Harford County families that did that. And so there's competition and conflict between the siblings. Who gets what? You know how that goes. Well, I cleaned it the most. I took care of it. Well, I helped mom, and where you were gone. All those disputes, and what did dad say? Well, that's not what they wanted, right? Property gets divided up. Individuals get sold because they were considered property. Families get broken up. And so that number, that 36, it shrinks. But he has creditors. You have to pay them right away. There's no holding off. You have to pay them. And so what is the one commodity that they can easily liquidate is a human being. Land is a little harder. So that's what they did. And some of them relocate to the deep south. Some siblings purchase the other siblings' interests. You know, I want a little bit more. Can I buy that from you? They did that. And so only about 5 of the 12 siblings remain in the area at Belle Vue Farm. And then Albert Davis is the last son holding the keys. And he becomes the final slaveholder of Cassandra or Cassie Davis and all of her children. And that's the name you see in the records. But by the 1840 census, we only see 2 white males overseeing 26 slaves. You thinking what I'm thinking? Ooh, that's an imbalance, isn't it? Guess they're probably going to plot and plan. And yes, they did. So they were known as the Howard or Harris family. They seized their opportunity. They said, you know what? Holidays were the perfect time. Easter, Whitsuntide, or Christmas. Why do you think that was? You said it. They are drinking. They're partying. And sometimes the people get a pass to go to town. And so the brothers actually get a pass. Now, the documents are not exactly clear, but somewhere during the Easter holiday between 1842 and 1843, they get a pass to go to Havre de Grace, which is about 3 miles away. So how do they get there? Do they go by boat? Do they come up that big, long driveway by horse? Well, I don't know. And then they never return, though. They get that pass, and they're gone. So they have plotted and planned. And then the sisters, Hannah and Eliza, follow soon after. We don't know if it's a couple of months, a couple of days, but we did find out that they escaped by boat. Remember? Chesapeake's right there, right there. And there's that fish house, which they probably were responsible for. So if you see them hanging around a fish house, you're not going to be suspicious, right? Because they're just doing a job. So what does Albert Davis say to Cassandra, their mother? Go find your children. He just sends her off. And don't show your face upon my farm until you have brought back your fugitive sons and daughters. What? Now, around this time, she's about in her late 50s. Now, you know, there was a time when 50, there was the laws changed between 50 and 45 was the maximum age you could hold someone as an enslaved individual. So she's in her 50s. So he just tells her, you go find them. Likely, she probably raised him. I mean, they have an interesting relationship, right? So she probably raised him, took care of him. So she's like second mom, but not, right? And so he trusts her that she's gonna come back. So she's no longer working really as an enslaved person. Maybe she takes care of his kids. What's called super educator, which is a retired enslaved person. And so maybe they get some provisions or they stay where they are, which she's probably helping him out. She returns about a year later without him. What does he do? He sends her back out again. She returns, sends her back out again, until finally she doesn't come back. So this is just a view of what it looks like, a little bit more about Havre de Grace and the Underground Railroad. If you've read Frederick Douglass's, one of his, The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, that's the one where he talks about his harrowing escape and how he almost thought he might get caught in Havre de Grace because he has to get off the train from Baltimore and cross the Susquehanna by ferry in Harvard Grace. So he's concerned that they're going to be, looking at passes again, that somebody's going to recognize that that's not him, the description's not right. So there's that. And then Harvard Grace was often referred to as the promised land because people knew that once they got to Harvard Grace and they could cross that Susquehanna into Cecil County and right into Pennsylvania, free and clear. Now, you may have heard of Daniel Hughes from Williamsport, who had a lumber business, and he had hidden compartments where he deliberately hid enslaved people. So he helped, so he was an agent. He would come down to Harvard Grace. Could he have helped the Parkers? Nobody's going to notice because he's always down there doing business, right? Or Daniel Ross, who was part of the Colored Men's Convention. So we know he is cognizant and interested in social justice, but he was an inventor of a improvement of a boat propeller. He didn't invent the boat, but a improvement of the propeller. So maybe, and then he worked in Harvard Grace. He was a free man. So maybe they're used to seeing them and maybe they helped them and nobody was the wiser. We don't know exactly how they escaped by boat, but these individuals could have helped them. And I already mentioned the fish house. So if they're working at the fish house and nobody's paying attention. So let's focus a little bit more on Eliza. Eliza had a lot of names. Most enslaved people had one name or maybe two that they adopt, the last name, the surname they may have adopted later. But she was Eliza Ann Elizabeth Howard, and then Parker, add Parker onto that. Now, that's not her picture. That's my disclaimer, but I just wanted to have a picture of somebody. Now, she was about 12 years old when Elijah Davis died. Remember, her mother was about 38. They had two brothers that we know about, the one sister, Hannah, we know about. And then, after she self-emancipates with her sister, she meets William. That's not William. And he's from Anne Arundel County, Maryland, which is, Annapolis is in Anne Arundel County, our capital. They have children, they get married, they have children, and together with others in the community, they organize this informal vigilance committee, a self-defense. They would help people who were kidnapped, free blacks who were kidnapped, anyone, and they were not afraid. Whatever they needed to do, if they needed to use violence to rescue someone, that's what they did. The rescue was the important thing. So this is the house in which it all happened. It's no longer standing. There is a marker out there, but that's the house where the action happened on 9/11. And that's my disclaimer. There were several acts, 2 acts, in Preak versus Pennsylvania that had an impact on who could go where, who could cross over to reclaim their so-called property. So there was the 1793 Act, and that provided for return, but you needed to have certain documentation. And then some states, like Pennsylvania, had personal liberty laws that would protect individual Americans who were kidnapped. Kidnapping was a major crime. And so many states enacted these personal liberty laws, which were supposed to protect them. So they had all these provisions in place. You need to do this, you need to provide that, you need this document, so you couldn't just come up in there and claim, in some forged documents. You needed several documents. You have to really pull it together. Then there was 1842, where the personal liberty laws are struck down by Prigg versus Pennsylvania. Okay, so thought they had these protections in place. Now they have to come up with something else. So, but there's a loophole in Prigg. The state officials were not required to assist in the rendition process because it was a federal or constitutional matter. So they just stood by. But they could also, the marshal, as we're going to hear about marshal, could also deputize somebody right on the spot and demand that they help them capture somebody. And some states create new personal liberty laws that defy Prigg. So they say, well, okay. So action and reaction, right? And then in 1850, there's the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And closes the loophole that Prigg left open. So slaveholders are now feeling bold, like Gorsuch. Now I can go into Pennsylvania. All I need is a marshal and a couple of documents, and I can go and get them. And so that's what he does. But he hears about, he has you can deputize people, as I mentioned, and he gets some help. So here's his son, Dickinson Gorsuch. So a little bit about Edward Gorsuch. So in 1849, a couple of years before the Fugitive Slave Act, or a year before, 4 of his enslaved men escaped from Baltimore County. And they find work in Christiana. For 2 years, 49, 50, Gorsuch used every possible legal method to find and bring home his property. But he was not successful until, so we talked about the act. That gave him a little more power. And then an informant in August 1851 tells him where to find his property. So that's when he pulls together his resources, gathers his posse, gets a marshal. He's going to Christiana. He's going to get him. All right? But it wasn't so easy. He didn't expect what he came across. So he travels under the cover of darkness, arrives early in the morning, expects they're going to be asleep, but they were warned. The Parkers were forewarned and ready. So they've got the whole network. People telling, we see some suspicious people who look like they're slaveholders. They've been doing this for a while. They know what it looks like. So when Gorsuch and his posse arrive, first, William denies that his men are there. Eventually, okay, he says, he's here. But the 2 men are debating. They're quoting scripture. They're bantering back and forth. And then finally, Gorsuch gets a little frustrated and just, I'm just coming to get my property. But it's early in the morning. The commotion attracts a few of the neighbors. Now, they're right. The house that they're renting is owned by a man who's a Quaker. There are many Quakers in the neighborhood. And some come to offer assistance to the Parkers, not to Gorsuch. And they want to prevent an illegal kidnapping. So the white Quaker neighbors, including Parker's landlord, cautioned Gorsuch and said, look, you need to just go on home because you just might get hurt. This is no joke. And then the marshal tries to exercise his power and get them to assist him. Well, you have to help me. But they said, no. You need to leave lest you get hurt. we are not helping you. Then the outbreak. The debate got more and more intense. Gorsuch grew impatient. Finally, Elijah asked William, should I sound the alarm? So they had a system in place, this horn. She would sound the alarm out the window, which would attract all of their vigilance committee, their neighbors and everyone. She sounds this alarm. The posse is startled and they start shooting up at her. She ducks down, but she still has the horn out and she's still blowing the horn, but she's covered by the window. Neighbors go into defense mode. They know what that horn means. They start converging on the property with all kinds of makeshift weapons, corn cutters, whatever, you name it, farming implements, and some had guns. Both sides fight for their lives. Gorsuch wasn't ready for that. He was not ready for that. It's unfortunate, the tragedy, indeed. It's mayhem and murder. Gorsuch is killed. His son, Dickinson, is severely wounded. This is the picture in William Still's book. This is the one we're used to seeing. The rest of the Gorsuch posse run away, including the marshal. They drop some of the guns, other weapons, and then there's the aftermath. William Parker and Gorsuch's fugitives, they get assistance from the Quakers who disguise them and send them off to safety. Dickinson is wounded, but he's also nursed back to health by the same family, or maybe one of the other neighbors, the Pownell family. And I don't know if anybody saw Who Do You Think You Are? Actress Zoe Deschanel is a descendant of the Pownell family. It's just a little bit of trivia. She hadn't heard that story before. This is like a genealogy show. And then Frederick Douglass, here he is. Well, he and Parker knew each other from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Who figured? And he helps him to get to Canada. He helps the other two guys. He's in Rochester, New York. They make it there by foot, by plane, and other different forms of transportation. Douglass wrote, I could not look upon them as murderers. To me, they were heroic defenders of the just rights of man against man-stealers and murderers. So I fed them and sheltered them in my house. Not everything is clear, right? You know, is the law wrong? Should you fight against that unjust law? And as we look at things today, you know, people getting deported, is it just, is it unjust? You know, are they following the law? Is the law just? You know, so it's a lot to think about and a lot we're revisiting today. What border you have? We're a state, right? So, you know, we have to look to history sometimes to make decisions about today. Maryland slaveholders are outraged. How dare they? How did this happen? On September 15, 4 days later, 6,000 people gathered in Monument Square in Baltimore to express the outrage at the events in Christiana. Town meetings are all over. If you've been to Towson or Moncton, all in Baltimore County. And this is an article they ran to, you know, to declare how they felt. This was in the Baltimore Sun. They had a big meeting about protecting their property and enforcement of the fugitive slave law. 6,000 people gathered over this. if you've been to Baltimore, there's Gorsuch Street named after him, Gorsuch Avenue. That's how Baltimore felt. Well, lo and behold, where does John Wilkes Booth come into this picture? He responds. Now, you may not have known, he was born and raised in Harford County, in Bel Air. And he spoke out about the incident. He was friends and went to school with Gorsuch's other son, Thomas, in Baltimore County. So a lot of people associate him, Booth, with Baltimore County and other cities, but he was raised in Harford County. And some suggest that this incident really enraged him. You know, if you've read My Thoughts Be Bloody, you might, see where it fits, how his life kind of shaped up and where his environment, all of that, they say, may have motivated him to assassinate Lincoln. But there's the house. They really, the Booth family, by the time this house was built, didn't really live in Harford County so much. They started out in a log cabin. But that's Tudor Hall that's left now. If you haven't been there, it'd be a good little trip to check it out. They've got a lot of good history in there. And that's Milton Academy down at the bottom. Now Milton Inn. How am I doing on time? Okay. Oh, I better hurry up. So, several individuals, not several, over 100 individuals are charged with treason. But they send down 45 U.S. Marines and a posse of 50 civilians descend upon Christiana. They're going to find these individuals who did this to Gorsuch and ran the marshal off and were defiant. They're tearing up everywhere, looking in everybody's home. Homes owned by white people, homes owned by black people. Most of the black people left. They said, because that's a recipe for lynching, right? So but they do manage to arrest 100 people, 4 white men, and the remainder were black. All right, and about 41 were indicted. But they decide they're going to first put Castor Hanway on trial. Castor Hanway probably told them, no, I'm not going to help you. But you know what they thought? None of those formerly enslaved people could have thought this up. This sounded like they had a plan. Only a white man could have done that. So they said, and I already mentioned it eventually led to the largest treason trial in U.S. history. Enter Thaddeus Stevens to the rescue. We know Thaddeus Stevens. Oops. Did everybody see the movie Lincoln, where Tommy Lee Jones plays Thaddeus Stevens? If you hadn't seen it, that'll give you an idea of his gruff behavior and personality. So just so you would know, they do look a little alike, right? So he led the defense team. There's that center they talked about. I saw a picture of him out there. So you might know his story a little bit. He taught at the York Academy and continued his studies for the bar. But Pennsylvania was not necessarily his best friend, and they kind of came up with ways to keep him from passing the bar. No worries. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, what just happened? Let's see. There we go. Okay. Let me go back. Okay. He comes to Bel Air, again in Harford County, brings his Madeira wine, meets with the examining board, usually have questions and answers. That's how you pass the bar. You didn't have like a all-day exam in a room where you have to be quiet. They talked back and forth, and they drank. So the next morning, he left Bel Air with his past the bar, his certificate, which he could use with the reciprocity, where you can practice law in another state. Came back home, and he was practicing law. These are the other three gentlemen, well, Castor Hanway, Elijah Lewis, and Joseph Scarlett. He was acquitted, Hanway was acquitted in 15 minutes. Was that a real trial? 15 minutes. And no one was convicted for the death of Edward Gorsuch. Maryland governor. He said the trial was a farce and a mockery. So what happened to Eliza? And her mother, Cassie. So Eliza and her sister, they also are arrested. Somehow they get out pretty easily. And they end up going to join their husbands. Cassie, on the other hand, weary of the years. Remember, she sent out, has to come back. I mean, she actually comes back 3 times, goes out and comes back. She asked for them to help her return to Albert Davis. I mean, it's all in the newspaper. They're like, what? She asked the marshal to help her and the people in Philadelphia where the trial is. Abolitionist says she was coerced, but I don't know. She kept going back those other years, right? So, but pro-slavery advocates used her case to bolster their case of that African Americans, they prefer slavery. That's why she's asking to go back. And they used that as an example and said, that's how they all are, really. And that's how they used her case. Life in Canada and beyond. Well, Eliza lives out the rest of her years in Canada. I believe there are descendants who still live there. William, on the other hand, his story is a little more fuzzy. I heard one story I saw that he came down to speak at Lincoln University and then disappeared. Some surmise it was the Gap Gang that got him. They heard he was there. More recently, I heard that he started a whole new family in Ohio. And this is a marker they say he's buried in Kenton, Ohio, but the marker was erected by the Rotary Club of Octorara and the Christiana. So I don't know if this marker is in Christiana or if it's in Ohio. And then today, there's Gorsuch marker for that. Rowdown Farm in Anne Arundel is also in the Network to Freedom. That's where William Parker escaped from. And then we have the Gorsuch Avenue in Baltimore. Now Belle Vue Farm is added to the mix on the network. And then in Christiana, if you've ever been, they have these flags all over that say, freedom began here. And every year they have a big commemoration. They open up Zerker's Hotel, which is where some of the people were held. And I think maybe Gorsuch was there, you know, trying to nurse him to health, but were unsuccessful. They have an annual celebration. And they're all proud to say freedom began here. So that's how, you know, became the resistance, the riot. But Hosanna School Museum, we are working on all kinds of research on the Underground Railroad. We're using William Still's book to go through that book and looking at slaveholder, who we think are slaveholders, landowners initially, in the 1858 map and cross-checking, referencing, and back and forth. So we're going to create some new trails and some bus tours. And maybe I was thinking on my way over, we need to do a bus tour here It's not that far, just an hour apiece, and pull the whole story together, or several stories of these individuals who were documented. We're doing deeper research on the slaveholders and what their lives were like, just like we did with Belle Vue Farm. So stay in touch, join our mailing list, and see what tours we have coming up. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much.